eve of what promises to be very low-key ceremonies marking the handover of the Panama Canal from U.S. control to Panama. And although this deal has been decades in the making, it still has its critics. Here's NBC's Jim Miklashevsky.
This is the last U.S. military base in Latin America. But after 95 years of U.S. military presence, the Panamanians are moving in.
Okay, Sergeant Shirley, it's showtime.
Out of the thousands of U.S. troops once stationed in Panama, only a handful remain. Their final task, to hand over this base at East Corzal.
There's a sense of sadness, quite honestly, a sense of honor that we did the job as well as could be possibly done.
That job to protect the Panama Canal. The canal was built as a shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific, vital to U.S. economic and strategic interests. Each year, 13,000 ships carrying 190 million tons of cargo pass through the canal. Although not as militarily significant as it once was, the U.S. military still relies heavily on the canal. Without it, it would take Navy ships an extra 30 days and $2 million to steam around the tip of South America. Now that the U.S. is handing over control of the canal, there are serious concerns Panama may not be able to handle it. Fears that a single act of terrorism or even mismanagement could shut down the entire canal. A recent security report warns that the canal is a tempting target for terrorists. And with no standing army, Panama cannot match U.S. firepower and deterrence.
So I think we have a wide open door for both drug trafficking and regional terrorism to enter into Panama.
Experts also fear the gates are wide open for corruption or mismanagement, that hundreds of millions needed each year to maintain the canal could go to Panama instead.
There is concern that money could get siphoned off.
But canal officials insist there are adequate legal protections to ensure this vital waterway stays up and running.
To milk the canal in some fashion so that it starts to fall apart would be counterproductive to that strategy. And I think that they're well positioned to handle the canal very well.
But under international agreements, if the canal is threatened in any way, the U.S. has the right to intervene to keep it open. So even as the last American troops leave Panama, some in the U.S. military predict someday they'll have to return. Jim Miklashevsky, NBC.
That marks the transfer of power over one of the wonders of the world, the Panama Canal. The transfer from the U.S. to Panama was promised 22 years ago. Today it went smoothly and peacefully. NBC's Jim Avila is in Panama tonight.
The United States today said its official goodbye to the Panama Canal, a 50-mile-long, 30-yard-wide masterpiece of 20th century engineering, carved through Central America in 1904. Teddy Roosevelt ordered, quote, the dirt to fly, becoming the first president to leave the country during office to visit it. Jimmy Carter signed a new treaty in 1977, turning the canal over to the country that surrounds it. And today, President Clinton ignored the canal, refusing Panama's invitation to celebrate the turnover, insulting the country the United States military helped create to make the canal possible.
The main guest not coming was almost like a slap on the face.
Now Panama gets its way, running the canal on its own. The 10-mile-wide canal zone, the virtual country within a country, gone. The United States retaining the right to protect it from foreign aggression. How important is the Panama Canal to the United States? 15,000 ships pass through here every year, 7 out of 10 of them heading to or from the U.S. The Panama Canal has always been a statement of American pride, arrogance, and ingenuity.
It was the moonshot of its time. It was an enormous undertaking, the most ambitious, costly effort that this country had ever made.
Historian David McCullough wrote the definitive book on the canal and says its construction signaled America's arrival as a world power, digging where the French failed and lost more than 20,000 workers to malaria and yellow fever. The United States succeeding because it not only conquered the jungle, but disease, discovering that mosquitoes carried the twin killers.
Ashton, and you?
Now few Americans, calling themselves Zonians, remain, personally hurt by the turnover.
They lost their homeland. This is my home.
And you think that the United States walked out on that?
But Mark Quinn, also a third-generation Zonian, says the canal legacy cannot be forgotten, even when America leaves.
The people that worked on the canal were filled with an esprit de corps and were made to feel very proud of what they were doing.
So even on a day when the United States officially says goodbye, the American pride and spirit that built this canal at the beginning of the century flourishes today with each ship that steams through an American masterpiece. Jim Avila, NBC News, Panama.
Up next here.
The struggle between the United States and Panama is winding down along with the century. At the end of the year, Panama officially takes control of the Panama Canal, built in the early 1900s by the United States. A ceremony today marked the handover, but as CBS's Jim Axelrod reports, bitterness remains.
After a century's worth of criticism for being too involved in Panama, the U.S. was hammered at today's canal transfer ceremony for not being involved enough.
I think it's a wonderful opportunity for the United States to realize the great potential of this canal.
Jimmy Carter led a U.S. delegation thin on Clinton administration movers and shakers, fueling Panamanian feelings that they'd been snubbed on perhaps the most important day in their history.
We were expecting high-ranking officials, even the President Clinton.
And instead, what are you getting?
Nobody.
The bad feelings are fitting. After all, the countdown to the transfer, now measured in hours, started in violence years ago.
Long-simmering resentment erupts among students in Panama.
It is 1964. Riots have broken out at a high school in the strip of U.S. sovereign land here called the Canal Zone.
The trouble began when a group of American high school pupils flew an American flag without the Panamanian flag by its side.
When Panamanians arrived to put up their flag, fighting broke out.
The police and U.S. troops brought the rioters under control. More than a score were dead, including 4 U.S. soldiers.
The riots led the United States to reassess its Panama policy, and eventually to the Panama Canal transfer treaties that were celebrated today.
If not the treaty riots of 1964, it would have been something else. What is remarkable is that it took so long.
President Clinton did issue a statement from Washington today, underscoring America's confidence in Panama's ability to run the canal. But for many Panamanian leaders here, actions still speak louder than words, and they view the president's absence from today's ceremony as a lack of respect for all of Latin America. Jim Axelrod, CBS News at the Panama Canal.